For many years in Britain, the story was a young person left their parents' home, married by 25, bought a house, and started a family. But the story today is very different. The number of young people living with their parents has been on the rise since the turn of the century. In fact, the number of 20 to 34-year-olds living at home has grown by nearly 50% since 2002.
The housing system in London really is a pretty disastrous system. For most people, and certainly at least half the population, they are paying through the nose.
I don't think it's realistic to think about how I could save to buy a home unless I change jobs and climb that ladder.
So why is it so hard to get on the London property ladder? Home ownership hasn't always been a national obsession. A century ago, 3/4 of the United Kingdom rented the place they lived. Now, only about a third of the country's households are renting, but those that are have a serious disadvantage if they ever hope to own. To understand how we got here, let's rewind back to a pivotal part of the country's history, the Second World War. The country, which was heavily bombed during the conflict, began a period of rebuilding and repairing between 1945 and 1951.
The government launched an ambitious building program of homes to rent at controlled prices.
Prime Minister Clement Attlee's government built more than 1 million houses during this period. By the 1970s, 1 out of every 4 London households was living in an affordable social rented accommodation, also known as a council house. But 1979 changed everything.
To all the British people, howsoever they voted, may I say this: now that the election is over, may we get together and strive to serve and strengthen the country of which we are so proud.
Margaret Thatcher was elected Prime Minister. Less than a year later, she introduced an act allowing tenants in social housing to buy their homes from the government, moving these houses from the public to the private sector. She also eliminated the rental cap, which meant prices were vulnerable to the whims of the market. Her policies initially increased home ownership among the working class in London, but eventually lower and middle income workers began to see the drawbacks of being thrust into the competitive private housing market.
It became much worse for tenants, but much more attractive for landlords. And that sector began to grow, and it grew from the mid-1980s right through till now. Rents which take up 30 or 40 or 50% of their salary, so they're not in a position to save the money you need to break into the ownership system. So we have, if you like, disgruntled people, but particularly young adults, who are really not being served by this system at all.
This graph shows the relationship between private rentals and home ownership in London. When Thatcher took office, private rentals were declining steadily, while home ownership with a mortgage was on the rise. By the end of her term in 1990, this changed dramatically. Private rentals rose while those owning homes with a mortgage dwindled. More than 30 years later, for the first time in decades, there were more London households privately renting than owning a home with a mortgage. Thatcher also weakened trade unions, a platform workers used to demand better work conditions and pay.
All she's on about is these high-tech, going to college and all this. I'm thick, I'm not a college man. I'm a labourer, that's all I want is a labouring job. She's took them all away.
She felt these unions were too powerful and made British companies less competitive on the global stage. Her plan worked. Well, somewhat. British firms did become more competitive, but salary growth across the country declined from about 17% in 1979 to just over 10% in 1990, and it has continued to decline today.
In London, the average house price in the 1980s was something like 3 or 4 times the average salary. But now in London, it's something like 13 times the average salary.
Jonathan Uman is a 30-year-old Londoner who has felt the sting of high rents and low salaries. Buying a home seems very far out of his reach.
If I'm attempting to save, it's like straight away, as soon as the paycheck comes in, it's going into savings. By the end of the month, you're thinking, right, okay, need to like take another 50 quid back out or another 100 quid out just to get through. So it's kind of demoralizing, I suppose. But if I wasn't to leave London, I don't imagine that I would even consider the idea of, at this stage of my life, of like thinking to like save for that.
The financial crisis in 2007 and the bursting of the US bubble marked another turning point in London's property market. The housing borrowing and lending system collapsed because low-quality debt had been bundled and sold as securities on the global markets by banks as though it was reliable, but it wasn't. The crisis triggered in North America was so bad in the UK that the country's finance minister at the time said there was a danger of a breakdown in law and order hours after the government bailed out one of its troubled banks. The British government devised a rescue plan that involved buying some of this bad debt in exchange for stakes in these banks. By 2011, London had bounced back faster than many other cities in the country and around the world.
Many of us in London had expected, at the time of the financial crisis, that the economy of London would really suffer because it was so dependent on this financial sector, and the financial sector had really behaved so badly. We thought a lot of it will shrink here. But because of the generosity and scale of this government rescue of the banking system, actually London did very well.
The rebound cemented the capital as a stable market for investments and attracted several real estate buyers. These investors bought up several homes in the city, either for rental income or for its resale value as house prices appreciated. Another thing attracting investors, paying less on property taxes.
In New York, for example, if you own a luxurious apartment in an expensive district in Manhattan, you could be paying thousands and thousands of dollars a year in property tax. Quite a significant percentage of its value, which is not the case here. The most you can have to pay in London in annual property tax is in the range of £2,000 or £3,000 a year.
Some of the most attractive areas to these investors are the boroughs of Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea in West London, where rows of investment houses lie vacant.
It's not very transparent, but it's pretty clear that investing in London housing has been very attractive to investors.
The government has tried to make housing more accessible to lower and middle income earners. In 2016, for example, the government rolled out an additional 3% tax for homeowners with more than one property. This was on top of the existing stamp duty land tax. The idea here was to make the property market more accessible for individuals and families rather than investors. Perhaps the government's most successful policy has been the Help to Buy scheme set up in 2013. This scheme allows first-time buyers of newly built homes in London to borrow up to 40% of the purchase price in the form of an equity loan, if they can pay a 5% deposit. Traditional mortgages usually require at least 10%. So, for example, if a buyer wanted a flat in London that cost £500,000, she would have to pay a £25,000 deposit. Under the scheme, the government could loan this buyer up to £200,000 interest-free for 5 years. The rest, £275,000, would have to be borrowed from elsewhere, like a bank. The scheme has been popular. About 330,000 households have bought homes through the scheme since 2013. But some experts, including Professor Edwards, have observed drawbacks to the scheme as well.
There were some pluses for the people it was aimed at, but because it was operating across the country and across the markets, it also seems to have pushed prices up.
For young people like Jonathan, the hardest part of buying a home is saving the initial deposit, a problem the Help to Buy scheme doesn't completely solve. His solution to becoming financially secure? Leave London.
I'd consider leaving London and moving to another city where I could earn a bit more money, where things are still cheaper, so rent could be cheaper, or I have friends there that I can stay with perhaps for a short amount of time just to get me back on my feet.